What's up, YouTube? We are Team Troponin coming back with Troponin episodes. Episode 22. Friendly reminder, if you're enjoying this content, you can like, subscribe, drop us a comment, turn on notifications. You'll find tons more of this information at teamtroponin.com. And just want to say thanks to you guys for the feedback. We've gotten a lot of messages from you guys just saying thanks for putting out the content, and we appreciate the good juju. Was there anything else that I needed to include in the intro? What do you say?
Notifications.
Notifications.
Remember to buy a raffle ticket.
Raffle ticket. And that's right. Team Guac, Team Nut Butter, Team Lift Happy, Team Lift Angry.
Leave a comment.
Leave a comment.
Yeah.
I think we got them.
I think that's it. Yeah. We'll get it.
So we're going to kick off this. I just wanted to come back and kind of revisit a topic I talked about, I think on the last episode, talking about, or a couple ago, talking about the rib cage and shoulder pain. And I went back and I listened to it and I was like, okay, that all made sense to me with a little bit more background, but I really wanted to make sure that for you guys as listeners, if you're at shoulder pain, you're not like, great, am I compressed? Where am I dying? Do I belong in the garbage disposal? Like, what's going on? The big picture of this is the shape of our rib cage, because muscles pull on it, changes a lot. And just like any other part of our body, it's going to change based on how the muscles pull. Very often when I'm looking at shoulder pain, one of the most missed parts of that rehab is actually the core working. So you're actually controlling the rib cage on the bottom border. So everything's kind of set on a stable base. So a lot of times people get really, really stable up top and they kind of forget to look down below. So kind of friendly PT tip of the day. But I think other than that, we were going to talk about things we wish we knew when we started.
Wait,
I knew then.
Yeah. Or did I mess up that order?
Maybe we were going to go to the optimal.
Just kidding. We're going to pivot again.
So stay tuned.
Yeah. So there's been a lot of talk on social media lately about, optimal versus suboptimal training. And I think it's really creating some interesting camps. And I'm always interested to see who falls in what camp. And it's pretty predictable, I think. But I wanted to hear your take on it.
Yeah.
Well, I think everyone's in search of optimal. I mean, clearly, but I think you can absolutely get lost in the weeds, and I think to make it anywhere in the sport, it's a long career. We're saying like for men, especially in men in bodybuilding, classics maybe a little younger, but men in bodybuilding, you don't reach your peak probably at 38 to 42. Most of us start working out as teenagers. Women, it's in like physique and bodybuilding, it's probably even older. It might be even as high as 45, 46 before you are really at your peak. And so it's a long time, and you can get a lot of things done correctly by working hard. Like it needs to be proper, and that don't just go in there, like John Defendis, and like annihilate yourself for no, without focus or without reason. But
don't just put your feelings in a muscle for sake of putting feelings somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you can get like always be in search of optimal, but you can go a long way with just with hard work, and just plain hard work is probably closer to optimal than most people who are really knee deep in the science want to believe, and which is if for when you're an expert or have a specialty in anything, it's like the most of the stuff you need to know, you learn really quickly, and then there's a whole like Mariana Trench or whatever. Is that the name of it? Like the deepest part of the ocean. There's a whole trench of information that's good to know, that does get you further. But most of what you need to know is a real small portion, and I think that's the same thing with training.
I was thinking about this earlier today, actually, because it's such a perennial topic. Well, excuse me, it's such a big topic right now on social media, and I think over the last 10, 15 years, like weight training has become so much more popular, and competing has become more popular too, both powerlifting and bodybuilding. And overall, that's a great thing. But because it's become so accessible, you have this huge influx of just fucking nerds, honestly. Yeah. And that's something for me to say. I am a nerd. I work as a software developer, but you have a lot of people who I think they're inclined to nitpick everything to death, like that engineering kind of mindset. When that's fine, the nitpicking is fine, but it becomes mental masturbation if you're not actually getting into the gym and killing it. And this is why, I think, Justin, you've said plenty of times that there are so many good dumb bodybuilders, and it's not that being dumb makes them good per se. It's just that they don't spend more overanalyzing than they do actually putting in the work.
I think you can kind of take this to the extreme even, and there's an example, and it would be Olympic weightlifting, which is studied as far as sports science is in depth as far as weight training as anything is, and clearly the guys today are stronger than they used to be. Like Lasha, I don't know if you follow it all, is an absolute, he's clean and jerking like 600 pounds. I mean, an absolute freak mutant, doesn't make sense, And so clearly the high level, high money, very intricate sports science makes a difference. However, Paul Anderson in the 40s and 50s was strong as fuck with zero science, And so now if you're past where Paul Anderson was, if you're cleaning and jerking 500 pounds, then yeah, you're going to need to know the stuff that, that the Lashes coaches are giving them. You're going to need to, but 3 people on earth are at that level, For the rest of us, like those things, it's fun to study and interesting to know, and clearly they make a difference, but you can get pretty damn far with doing everything wrong, like, which is what they did. Like back then, everything was wrong. All they had was hard work, and he's still stronger than, like he's still stronger than all but the top 2% of, Olympic lifters today, basically.
It's funny, I think, being a PT, especially like we train at Destination, where there are a lot of really, really smart, hyper analytical, got to pull out their protractor mid-set coaches. And then you've got other people who are just really, really beastly strong, like Branch when he goes in some training. And I think people assume that because I'm a PT, I'm going to be like, pulling out my protractor and get my setup, blah, blah, blah. And then I watch me train and they're like, do you know that was not squeaky clean? And I'm like, yeah, that's also why I'm a lot stronger than you.
Yeah.
And have taken myself a little further in the sport. And I think there's an assumption that as soon as you're like some sort of a professional, it's like people get this sort of like hierarchy or some sort of like morality about them as soon as they start putting out the protractor when they're training. It's like, if you're not setting up just right, somehow like, they're a better person than you or something. And it's mind boggling to me. I don't know if they think it's like a measure of intelligence or what, but I think it's just like anything where the more you know, the more you realize things really don't matter all that much.
You could do it with any sport, every sport has examples. Like John Daly is a pro golfer. He doesn't practice. Like he just plays golf, And so clearly, like, like I don't even know who the top guys are, like Phil Mickelson, Roy McIlroy, or whatever, the guys that really put, clearly they're better than John Daly, but John Daly's won 2 majors, he won the US Open. And he just goes out and plays every day. And so that's like the extreme example of he just goes out and works hard. It's not perfectly focused, but he plays a round or 2 every single day. He doesn't go out and hit 1,000 golf balls before 8 a.m. like Tiger Woods would or whatever. And so he's not going to beat Tiger. He's not at that level. But he's one of the best golfers. He's a professional. He's made a career of it. And so, for most people, there's a point where you need to make that transition. If you want to be the best who's ever lived at your sport, then you're going to need to be optimal, but not many people even have the ability to get there. And there's a long way before you even know if you have that ability, where just working hard and being consistent will get you far enough where you'll learn when that point is that you really need to put the effort. And even worse, you can put so much effort in being optimal that you never put in the hard work.
Right. Yeah. And that's, I think, what happens. And there's obviously a flip side of people who are so anti being optimal. They just kind of go out there and, and that's not excusable either. But I think it's really interesting that the people who have the most optimal mechanics are often the divisions that require the least amount of muscle mass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, like,
you'll often hear this defense, though, from people who are, well, I think in our opinion, too much, like too obsessed with the optimality. And they'll say, well, I don't have the genetics like so-and-so who just trains hard. I have to do this, and I wouldn't even be as far as I am if I didn't. I don't know. I feel like it's a bit of a cop-out argument.
Well, and it's unprovable because you don't have the control group. You don't have the, train like Branch Warren for 15 years and see where you're at. What if that's better? You don't have that. You're just making that assumption, and that one actually really bothers me because that is it's a always win cop out. It's like I haven't reached my goals, and so my cop out is it can't be anything I'm doing wrong. It's that I'm doing everything better than everyone else. I just haven't reached my goals because these other reasons that are outside of my control have prevented have not allowed all these things I'm doing better than everyone else to actually work.
I think it's interesting too that people assume they know all the systems and processes going on in their optimal training. Like you cannot possibly.
Yep.
You can't.
Yep.
So
draw a free body diagram of a squat. What is there, like there's 300 or 400 different muscles being activated. Draw the tension. Anyone's taking a physics class, draw a free body diagram for for 2 pendulums and you can't do it.
This
You've
is
got 37 joints all with different lengths and different torques, and
if you have any sort of an injury history, like that's going to play into where you have available range of motion. People don't think about like the small joints that have to happen too, and the fact that muscles might change roles as they go through different degrees of hip flexion. Like looking at the limb arc model really kind of changed how I view things, because it really clears up when people have some sort of a rotational deficit. It's not that the squat's the problem. It's just there's so much that we don't have control over.
Well, I think you kind of alluded to this, that people, if you get into a completely, I'll say, scientific mindset,
It's serious when air quotes.
Yeah, where you're only concerned with what current literature shows, then you're already limiting yourself so much more than someone who's willing to combine that with trial and error and with anecdotal evidence. Because like I think a really good example would be back training, actually. And if you I'm not certain on this, but I feel like the people who are overly obsessed with the optimality of exercises tend to really have shitty backs.
Yeah,
I think
back's a hard work muscle. I mean, it really is
work muscle. But I think this is one of the cases where I might be able to pinpoint why this is. Here's my wild ass guess: is that these people in this camp get obsessed with, like, 1, a super long range of motion, and 2, really strict technique. But most back exercises that are available to us in most gyms have a really terrible strength curve. And that's not that big of a deal if you're willing to just put a little oomph into your rows, which is what pretty much everybody with a big back does. Like, you start out, your first few reps are strict, and then they stay strict in the lengthened range, but they get a little oomph in the end because that's where it's hardest. And then you finish with some really sloppy reps. But you take that set, and that was a really effective set. And that's kind of, in my opinion, that's almost what you have to do at some point to get your back to grow, the same way that you can get your chest to grow with more strict exercises. But that's all you can really do for your chest. What are you going to, like, throw a shit ton of oomph into a bench press? You'll tear something eventually. But you can totally get away with it for back training, which is, and I think this is why you'll have people thinking that, oh, well, back requires so much more volume. It's like, well, maybe the way you're doing it, because your picture perfect set of barbell rows with like 2 25s on each side, because you also think you need a super long range of motion, is getting you like a tiny fraction of the stimulus you could get if you load it up and just put a little body English into it.
Well, and also because there's more than one muscle being worked,
That's exactly where I was going to go.
And so
back training in particular is so compound, and how much movement's actually happening at the scapula, and even all the way up to clavicle, you're going to get rotation.
So if you're trying to train your lat, or unless the muscle you're trying to be optimal for is this correct, is the weakest muscle. I mean, if you're trying to optimize for your lat, and there might be a weaker muscle somewhere in the teres major, infraspinatus, super, some adjacent muscle that's a weaker link. Unless you are absolutely 100% perfectly optimal for the stronger muscle of the lat, that carry over to the weaker muscle you're going to reach a point where that might be the failure point, and you could still be potentially optimal for the lat, but there's no way to be, you can't 100% isolate a single muscle group, and so that isn't then optimal at that point, because you're going to fail with these adjacent muscles that you're trying to minimize, but can't take the workload to zero. And then even worse, if you could completely singularly isolate the lat, then what are you going to do about all the other muscles? Because there's a lot of muscles in the back that need to get activated also. Are you going to do an exercise for every single muscle in the back?
Yeah, back training is really interesting just from the PT standpoint, because it's often a thing that either use as people's rehab, like whether it's shoulder or something else that's going on, or it's the area that gets jacked up the most. And I'm going to come back to the rib cage because I can't not talk about it. I mean, I can, but that'd be a sad day. And the position that we're in is going to determine where the range of motion is coming from too. People want to make their training look like someone else. Like, I would love if my back training could look like Dave, but my rib cage is shaped totally differently. And so it's going to change how well the scap moves. So it's just going to change my setup, which is going to be affected by my arm length and anthropometrics. And you kind of see how this compounding effect really starts to take place. And when an influencer comes out and, is small and has pretty favorable anthropometrics and come out and say, well, we have to have, perfect execution of everything. It's kind of like, it really invalidates the ability to be creative and actually make training work for your body. There's so much more than just one way of doing something. And I think especially as a female, where we're coming to a gym and we're worried about doing something wrong. So many women are coming to the gym and worried about what are we doing wrong. And I think even novice lifters too, even if they're male, and the more these very opinionated black and white influencers come out, I think the more we're closing out the gym culture, and really taking away the ability to move forward into progress.
Well, I think you could, it's always good to look at like the extremes. If you look at the extremes or like the rare cases or the exceptions, you can kind of work your way back and see where a failure point would be for the norm. And so there might be, for a particular anthropomorphic set of joints, person, a perfectly optimal rowing motion. And you could argue there is. And there is that rowing motion. Well, what makes it optimal? What makes it optimal is that it's activating the muscles that you're trying to activate optimally. Okay, perfect. No one's going to argue about that. Now let's take an extremely different anthropomorphic body, totally different. Not maybe something you don't even find on Earth. Someone who's just barely even looks human. Now that form is no longer optimal. Mm-hmm. Okay, so there is a case where that form isn't optimal. Now, so that means that there's a range. And so at what point is a form no longer optimal for all body types? Mm-hmm. And then in that case, what is the goal? Is the goal to stimulate a muscle or perform an optimal form? And so you have
totally nailing it. And I think just again being a destination has been really interesting. I don't think I've been in an environment that's maybe second guessed my own like setup and knowledge more than being there. Because you have so many people watching for things to be set up perfectly. And I'm like, I'm not put together like these dudes. Mm-hmm. But you see these guys, smaller, younger dudes who are more similar to my size trying to row like Dave. And it's like, homie, like you got some time before you're in the 4Xs.
Yeah. It's hard to get around that because I think just in general, people are prone to black and white thinking. And this is not limited to fitness by any means. But I was just reminded, like, I tend to not think in black and white about much, and so it kind of strikes me when I realize how many people do. I mean, it's not like I don't mean to make it sound like some kind of moral failing, but it's hard to think beyond black and white if you're not already reasonably well versed in a topic. Like a guy came up to me, we were training legs the other day, and this dude came up to me and we were on the Cybex squat press, which if you don't know is it moves in an arc, so it deloads at the bottom, heavier at the top. And a couple pieces away was just a regular 45-degree sled linear leg press. And he asked me, like, what's the difference between these two leg presses? And I explained to him, it was like, well, this one's, heavier at the top, lighter at the bottom because it moves this way. The other one has same resistance from top to bottom. And I guess since the squat press is the one we were using, he's like, oh, so the squat press is better. I'm like, no, no. They're different.
Yeah.
It actually just made me think. I just reposted an old T-bar row video of the last time I really pushed my weight up. I think I was doing 10 plate T-bar rows. And the comments were actually, because the only people who follow me anymore are the people who are like-minded, I guess. And the comments were kind of making fun of, you're not going to grow by doing that. And so, but just now I'm thinking about what's optimal can be defined differently every workout. Or, that was not optimal if I was trying to activate my lats. It's clearly not. But that wasn't my goal. That was a strength movement. That was a fun thing, and it obviously taxed the muscles. And it's not like I do that every single workout. But I felt strong that workout, and it something you don't go that heavy very often, and it was a fun thing to do. And if you do keep things completely black and white, you miss those things that I think add value long term. There's some. Yeah. It might not have been optimal to target my lats, but having 10 plates on a T-bar row in my hands and moving that weight, there's some benefit to that, that strength adaptation that makes then the optimal movement next week even more optimaler.
I have a confession. When I tell people that I'm working with, you don't have to be so strict with your rows. There are a few times this week I've said, don't go Justin style on these rows. But you can be a little sloppy. It's okay. You're not going to die.
And those are the ones, those are the only ones I video. No one wants to see because I do, one of my favorite way to do bend over rows that I never really video because no one wants to see it is a old school kind of a wider grip, like the way Lee Haney used to, really where I'm pretty close to parallel with the ground. And I actually row to my lower chest, up, my sternum region, and sometimes I don't even go to 225 on those, sometimes only 185. And it's very strict, and what fails is different, like on like a 10 plate T-bar row, the failure is really just like exhaustion, and it's more mid back and traps, and my lats probably don't get much of anything, but I do, it's like you do a whole range of stuff, and what's optimal at one point, like when I'm doing the really strict bent over ones, I feel those more in my lats, I get a little more rear delt in them. There's reasons for doing the things you do,
Yeah.
and yeah, I guess that actually kind of highlights one of the problems too, is if you're an optimal guy, you're probably only showing the videos that you think are showing optimal form. You might throw in some heavy stuff, a little sloppy stuff, but you're never going to put that on video and show anyone. Just like I'm never going to show anyone the really strict, lighter things I do, because the fun thing I like to show is the few times I do real, people think like you lift that way every time. I show like one set every 10 workouts.
Yeah.
That happened to be, that's about how often I go that heavy.
That's the only reason I deadlift anymore.
But on the same topic of like, going too heavy, like I don't know anyone who ends up rowing, say, 7 or 8 plates strictly on a T-bar row without doing those sloppy sets. You're not gonna get there. So, and like I think that the optimal crowd would agree that someone who, if you take what you can row strictly and you add 2 plates to that or 4 plates to that, that's going to reflect in your back if you're doing it strictly. Well, you're not going to get to that point without also throwing in the slop. Almost, I don't see anyone incrementally adding like 1 or 2 pounds a week and going from 3 plates strict to 7 plates strict without some extra body English at some point along the way.
Yeah, your rate of strength increase would not be optimal unless you spend a little bit of time not training optimally.
You know what, actually, I really like to post that Mike Official put out this week talking about pull downs. And he basically talked about make it work for you. It's okay. Like control the weight, hold it for a moment. You can, swing it down a little or really control it. Just whatever you do, put some tension on the muscle. And I was like, from someone who has that kind of authority and is very, very precise with what he does, I really appreciated that he's really kind of made it simple for people lately. And I'm so grateful for that.
Yeah.
Well, what if you were goofing around and you found an absolutely atrocious form that would make Ronnie Coleman look like the strictest, most optimal lifter, but it absolutely murdered your lats? It's like, what do you do then?
Huh? Assuming I wasn't like risking tearing a lat every time I did it, sure.
Or hurting spine.
So, so what even is optimal then at that point? Optimal is what targets the muscle the most, And so what instead of like being form policed or like going back to the black and white, it's unlikely that terrible form is going to be optimal, but it's not, the chance is not zero.
I think the big takeaway for people too is just knowing that whatever you see on YouTube, Instagram, social media, whatever, is probably a good baseline, but you need to be able to explore and find what works for your body. And I think the more black and white we become with our thinking, you might really be missing out on something that feels awesome or has great results for you because you're trying to do what you're told rather than feeling what you need to feel.
Right. Well, and on that note, like your personal N=1 anecdotal evidence is valuable. Like there's I don't think this has always been the case, but in science in general or in academia, but there's like this super strong bias against anecdotal evidence. And I can kind of understand it in a lot of research contexts, because the reason that we do research the way we do is to try to remove bias. But if you observe something working with your own body and then you change it up and it stops working, that's valid evidence.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of like you can get lost and miss that point. But a sports scientist needs to find what's optimal for N=everyone. You have to find what's optimal for N=1. And what's optimal for everyone. There's going to be a bell curve that's optimal. And the optimal form is going to be right in the middle of the bell curve that's most approximately optimal for the most percentage of people. But that doesn't mean it's optimal for everyone, and you might be one of the outliers. You're probably not. You're probably, for the most part, you probably are. And that's why bell curves are the way they are. And most people, optimal is what optimal is. But you don't know, and it's like getting back to the black and white. If you just focus entirely on that, you can really miss a lot of things.
Yep.
Mhm.
If anyone listens to Scott Stevenson, or if you don't, you should. But he harps on this a lot. How like, what is it called? Biological interindividuality. It's definitely a thing.
It's a lot of syllables.
Yeah, a lot of syllables. People are different, basically. And this is
and you should listen to him. I think of all the people out there, he's probably just across the board, training, nutrition, just as far as true, like, you know, in the textbook scientific knowledge, he's applicable to bodybuilding. I don't know that there's anyone better. Sorry.
He's awesome.
Yeah, he's good. So yeah, I guess to slightly play like devil's advocate or play the other side here, I think if you do need to get optimal or worry about it a little more, it'll probably be with the body parts that you're having trouble growing. So if you know, again, to use back training as a good example, like plenty of people train back hard as hell. They get super strong on most movements, including like rows and deadlifts, and they look at their back and like, oh, I'm kind of thick, but I still don't have very big lats, like the powerlifter back, basically. It's like, okay, at that point, you can start to get a little bit more specific with your movements and get really strict about it, because there's something that you haven't been able to activate. But you'll probably need to get up into at least like, you know, the 2 or 3x shirt range before you really start to worry about that.
I think just from like a mechanics standpoint too, I'm kind of talking out loud here and thinking out loud, thinking about just the classic powerlifter back and how even your training style is going to have an effect on how well you can or cannot develop certain body parts, and where the optimal may become more important. So someone who's a powerlifter maybe has a super thick back, really, really strong presser, is going to have a really hard time actually getting their shoulders in a position to where they can optimally hit lats. And so you have to be more precise at that point. I think that's where training history is really going to affect how important optimal is for a specific body part for people. Yeah, that's true. And then even then the pendulum might swing the other way. Like if you spend a couple of years really learning how to use your lats, then you could probably slop things up a little bit more, but now it's a totally different context. Yeah. And so you can finally start to train back productively the way your favorite, you know, pro bodybuilder has been doing for the last 10 years. I think it was Pat Davidson. Oh yeah. That I reposted the other day. Yeah. He said something about, oh God, it was basically like, you don't just get strong by accident. Like if you're like athletes, they usually have some appreciable amount of muscle mass. And this is getting jacked. This isn't golf. Yep. And I was like, that line. Yeah. And I agree with that. And I think Pat does a good job, as much as he can be polarizing at times. I think he does a really good job of maintaining the importance of mechanics while still training hard. And he's brilliant with mechanics. Mm-hmm. But I think he also said that of all the goals that you can train for, hypertrophy is probably the one where movement specificity matters the least. Or how do you feel about that? I don't know if I completely agree, but I think with the current culture,
I understand the statement. I think,
yeah, I think more people could stand to hear that right now.
Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah,
I think, like, as a general rule, and this is what I tell my clients, it's like it's a long process. Adding size is a long process, and so at the core, it's very simple. What the core that will get you most of the way most often is, you know, eat the right foods, good, clean, whole protein sources, complex carbohydrate sources, healthy fats. Eat them multiple times a day, and try to continually increase the amount of those you're eating without getting fat. And then when you're in the gym, training a bodybuilding rep range or bodybuilding time under tension range or whatever you want to do, however to correlate to the fact that to stimulate the muscle fibers in a way that seems to trigger protein synthesis, and try to get really strong while doing that. Have that be your core. And then along the way, while this ball of core stuff is passing through time, you know, reach out and, you know, put some effort into optimal, put some effort into, you know, and eventually you'll learn, like, you know, because that core is there, and somewhere in there is the optimal thing for everything, you know, the optimal back training, the optimal form for this movement. And along the way, you know, work within that core of training hard, getting stronger, eating good food, you know, and work with it. But as long as you stay in that core, that you travel through time, you know, you'll get most of the way there. But if you don't ever do that, and you just only go in search of optimal, and you miss that boat, you're never going to get there. Yeah.
What about are we ready to pivot topics?
Yeah. Before I got pretty off. That was a bit worse than healthy ever.
I think that was a great way to sum it up.
Before we pivot, Justin had something to say about a mountain.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this was like a riddle that I guess only the most intelligent humans on Earth can solve, and it's what can jump taller than the tallest mountain.
I thought about this all day today.
It was on Dora. That's where I heard it. So,
Right. Wow.
Swiper failed. If anyone wants to know, it's everyone. Mountains can't jump.
You just ruined the dad joke I was going to use for my next IG post.
No, the best part about dad jokes is everyone already knows them.
Yeah.
They get better the more you tell them. They're like,
even bigger eye rolls.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So this last one, I think we'll kind of have a perennial topic here broadly. That is, if we knew then what we know now. And so today's is, I'm going to call it, there are no magic or special foods.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is that there are a bunch of different ways to eat. Well, maybe not even a bunch. There are a handful of ways to eat and get you to your goals in bodybuilding, but there really aren't any magical foods. You're always bound by the laws of thermodynamics, and you always need to, basically eat your protein and your carbs. I guess keto, maybe people would disagree with that, but I remember even when I was a good few years into training, I could easily get suckered by, I don't know, you'd find like an article on T Nation or something that it wasn't even necessarily pushing a specific diet in terms of calories or macronutrients, but they were just insistent that, I don't know, like grass-fed beef was just the thing, or like pasture-raised eggs, or if you eat this special combination of animal products, then you'll get all these micronutrients that'll almost make your calories irrelevant. Or they wouldn't come right out and say that, but they kind of try to be presenting that.
What was that butter? Oh man, there was a grass-fed butter, but there was a special name.
No, that was the keto butter that would go in the coffee, right?
I don't remember, but I remember everyone was like, that was the only butter they would eat. I'm like, it's still butter. It's just butter.
Kerrygold?
No.
Yeah, that might have been it.
Kerrygold was the butter that was popular, but then
it was like a grass-fed butter, but it was, and I just thought everyone. I was like, it's still butter. It's the same butter.
The butter in the coffee.
But I bought it. I didn't get any bigger or better, but
didn't help.
No, it's not any different than other butter.
I bought it, and I at least tried to convince myself that it tasted better than other butters. But after a couple sticks, I thought, I don't really know. I think all butter is pretty good.
Yeah, it's just
butter in general
really tell a difference.
Yeah, you can't. Yeah, it's not. Yeah, ever tell you about the worst butter I ever had? It was amazing.
It's like pizza.
Your butter. Well, no, there's such a thing as bad pizza.
You know what I mean.
But it's still pretty good. It's still better than.
Oh man.
Yeah, I've had some bad pizza, but but butter is good. You almost can't have too much butter on a dish.
Yeah, for me, if I could go back, it would have been like getting lost in the weeds. For years, I did. Like I would read one article about training while fasted or increased growth hormone or something, and so then I would be sure that I had to not eat for 3 hours before a workout. And even if my growth hormone levels were increased, there's no way for it to do anything because I had no amino acids in my body. I did that for years. Like I would find a scientific article or find some old like from the Eastern Bloc countries, you used to be able to find articles, and I would just whatever specific thing they said, and I would my brain would say, well, if I'm not doing that, clearly I'm not only not going to grow optimally, but I'm going to lose all my muscles. So and I would just get way too lost in the weeds. And that I don't think I ended that till after I graduated college. And so I started training when I was seriously when I was about 14 or 15. So that was, 8 years of slowed progress because I would just get lost in the weeds of science, which is, that's why I always want to do that's why I want to do that. If we knew then what you know now, because I always worry that I'm doing that to the next generation by going into all the scientific detail, because I know if I would have heard myself talk as a 19-year-old, 18-year-old, 16-year-old, I would have touched on, high molecular weight carbohydrates. Well, if I don't have that during my workout, I'm clearly going to lose every ounce of muscle I ever gained by the end of the workout. If I could go back, that would be it. Not get lost in the weeds. Spend some time there, but not get lost.
Yeah. I just remember.
You got nothing, Danny?
Yeah.
I knew everything off the. No,
I knew it.
Are we going to strictly nutrition or
anything?
Probably just to not worry about doing things right. I think when I first started lifting too, I was so worried about doing something wrong that I kept waiting for more feedback from people, and instead of just doing the thing and practicing and being okay with having a couple reps that weren't perfect.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, you're also, I think you were a pretty damn good athlete. So I'm guessing you had like pretty good kinesthetic awareness when you first
Actually,
went
you
to
know
the
what?
gym.
I'm going to pull that back. I'm going to say if I knew then what I knew now, I think just knowing that you can't be peaked all the time. Because if I go back and I look at training, like the things that always threw me off the most would be like basically not operating 100% all the time. When I started lifting, I was training for half Ironman and started powerlifting. And I got really good at powerlifting like really quickly. And when I competed, it was one of those where people were like, where did you come from?
Right.
And just not like, I didn't understand that I couldn't do that all the time. So like, I actually went in the next day after my first meet and I tried to deadlift again because that's what I do. And I was like, well, you know, I pulled this yesterday. Why can't I pull this today? And I felt like I was falling apart. And now I'm like, God, you're an idiot. That's why. So I think, and I coach a lot of people who are, I coach some very advanced and some that are kind of more novice intermediate, but have never really tapped into their true strength. And the closer you come to actually reaching your current maximum strength expression, I think the more important that becomes. And a lot of people don't actually know how to tap into that kind of strength expression phase.
Yeah. So, I mean, I feel like that applies even in a narrower context, because you were powerlifting and training for endurance events.
It was so
and
much
I think
fun.
it was all with a busy schedule at the same time.
Yeah,
and
you were in grad school.
Right. And you were trying, like, and you had to learn that you can't be peaked at all of those things. But I've even found that, you know, now training for bodybuilding, it could be off season, I'm eating a ton, I'm gaining weight, I'm sleeping well, all these factors are in place, and I'm still not going to be at my all-time strongest. Not just every workout, but there will be like a period of like doldrums for a few weeks where like I'm still growing, appetite's still fine, all these other markers of bodybuilding progress are still good, but weights are like down a little bit or at least stagnant. And I don't know, like lately I think we've had enough on our plates where I don't worry about it as much, but in years past I would have been like kind of freaking out, like, oh man, what's wrong with my training? What the hell?
What's off?
That's a good one, because I would do the same thing. It's because like strength and progress is kind of weird because it's pretty linear. You know, if you look over a 10 or 15 year period, it's pretty linear. But when you you know, like you're looking at a smooth trend line, there's a lot of days in a 10-year period, you know, 3,000 of them, 3,600 of them. And I would do that all the time where like, because for most of my early time, it was just all strength. You know, I did a lot of high volume, or it was, you know, but it was all kind of cored around strength, powerlifting, trying to get stronger. I never really were competing in powerlifting, but whatever movement I was doing, the goal was to get stronger in it. And I would like really, really stress about, you know, this is the fourth workout in a row I've done the same weight, you know, and think like, try to like reanalyze everything and like, you know, like sit down and rethink my whole life because what, you know, this is, but then, you know, the next workout you make a big jump in weight, you know. It's like you add, you know, you add tens to each side and get the same rep out of nowhere, you know, and then it, you know, and so you stretch it out over, you know, several years, that strength curve is looks very linear, but if you break it in, and I would really stress about that.
I think this is the kind of thing that, you know, we've shared a couple of clients, and more recently, we've had one transition from working today to working with me. And I think as a coach, one of the biggest things I try to do with people is remind them that not everything is linear. And so what do you do when you can't, like they watch Dave train, and Dave's kind of a machine. I've never seen anyone progress as linearly as you do in almost everything. Like it's a little bit weird to me, actually. But a lot of people watch someone on Instagram or social media lift, and they watch their training, and they're like, why am I not progressing? Like this person's going up, you know, a rep or 5 pounds or something every week. And at some point you're going to hit some sort of a stall. And so that's, I think, where it becomes really important to learn how to manipulate your training variables so that you can pull back in a way where maybe the absolute load is scaled back, but you're finding a way to still move the needle forward. I don't know, just with coaching, that's one of the things I always want to equip my people to do.
Yeah. And I mean, even as linearly as I have been able to progress, especially the last couple of years, it's definitely linear over the long term. That's what you should be looking for. But that's a long term of like, you should be able to say that, okay, here's where I'm at. 6 months from now, I want to have like, you know, an extra plate per side on the hack or whatever. But there's like, I don't know if I've ever seen anyone whose strength literally is linear throughout that entire time period. Like you'll go on a tear where you just feel unstoppable for like 4, 6, maybe 8 weeks, where you're like, you'll add, you know, a 10 to each side for 3 weeks in a row, and the reps are the same. You're like, what the hell? This is awesome. Which makes it a little bit harder to accept because you feel so awesome, and then finally it ends, and you're like, damn it, what the hell's wrong? It's like nothing's wrong. You just can't keep that up forever. But if anything, it's just like Danny said, it's a reason to pivot. Like I generally like lower volume training, but I can't like keep it rock bottom forever and just expect these massive strength increases forever. So when they stall, it's like, okay, it's time to increase the volume, and that'll bring benefits of its own. And it's just kind of cyclical.
Yeah, and actually, I think you just added another one to my list. We ruined it all. We blew it all out on the first time we ran this. But is I would make sure to enjoy those phases, those rapid strength progressions, because I can think back, and I wish I would have probably jumped on that even more, because you kind of plan out your training, and you say like with volume, there are chunks of time I can think looking back where there might be like a 2-month period or something where I was progressing really, really well like that. And I don't think I really appreciated it at the time or really enjoyed it or really took the effort to really to look at my training and say, something's happening here. I'm whatever it is, I'm gaining strength very quickly. What can I do to absolutely maximize it? Because this isn't going to last forever.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is easy to take for granted.
I think it's interesting too. Everyone has a little bit of a different like duration delayed effect. Like I can look at where I'm at, and for me, usually it's like 10 days, sometimes 2 weeks, that I'll really start to be able to get some sort of a causative relationship.
You mean delayed effect, like in terms of stimulus or fatigue?
Kind of both, I guess. Maybe a little bit of interplay.
Yeah.
But that's only with certain pet movements too that I've like got data on from years back, where I can look back and say, when I did this happened.
Yeah.
And it's where it's important to kind of know your body and all that too.
That makes me think of kind of another topic though. You ever noticed how you have your pet movements, and then you get emotionally involved, and those emotions sometimes drive you to make choices that are not really good for progression. But then you'll have other movements where
I have no idea what you're talking about.
It's not like you don't like these other movements, but they're not so important to you. So you'll more easily make smart choices. And then if you look back at the progression of those movements over a few months, you're like, damn, that was pretty consistent progression.
Yeah.
But like I feel like leg training has been that way for me, because like leg training is the area where I'm most satisfied with my weights. Like I always want them to keep going up. But it's like my deadlifting training was in powerlifting. Like I'm okay with where that's at, so I'm not making dumb choices like I am with bench press, because I suck horribly at it. So with leg training, if I have like 6 weeks in a row where I've got to move basically the same weight on the hack squat, I'm like, oh, that's fine. I'll just like pause a little more. I'll make the reps cleaner. I'll add a rep here or there if I can really get it, or something like that. And then leg training goes great. My legs are growing. My knees and hips don't hurt. And then once that little doldrums phase is over, predictably the weights climb just fine again. And I didn't like bang my head against a wall with like a minor, injury or ache or strain or anything either.
While we're on this topic, can we pivot for just a sec?
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about some of the shoulder and elbow stuff you're looking at with the prime? Because I would love to hear what you think was going on, and then maybe interject a little bit. We haven't really had a chance to talk about this. We haven't really seen each other much the last couple months, except for the podcast.
Just do my rehab over the podcast. Yeah. Long story short, I very rarely have had to deal with any upper body. I've had very few injuries in general, but like upper body especially, I've hardly had to deal with anything. But lately, like past couple months, I had my left shoulder was aching quite a bit on pressing movements, and then right at the same time, my right elbow started like really bothering me. And actually, the elbow became more limiting factor than anything. Like I'd go to, especially on movements that got kind of heavy in the shortened range at the top, like I go on the the prime shoulder press or the prime incline press. And I wouldn't be able to finish reps, not just because my pecs or shoulders weren't strong enough, but like the elbow pain finishing the rep was just like, this stabbing pain kicked into where I couldn't finish a rep. And
That's what she said.
Totally, yeah.
Sorry.
It was just that big. And Danny can explain more about like the positional stuff that was probably at play. Recently, it's gotten better just because I've swap movements. I basically swapped from those prime movements to Smith machine movements for incline and shoulder pressing. So you can probably elucidate why that.
Well, I have some questions too. Were you only feeling this is the right elbow and left shoulder, left pec?
It's the left shoulder, the front left shoulder joint, and I haven't had any pec strain, but that left pec is certainly overactive.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a couple questions. And again, I think this is useful for listeners because most people have shoulder and elbow things, and there's not a lot of good like rehab out there for it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start left shoulder. When you say joint, how do you know it's joint? What do you kind of talk me through that?
I guess I don't technically know that it's joint, other than just the nature of the pain. It's kind of. I mean,
does it feel deep? Does it feel superficial? Does it feel like?
It's not. It's not super deep. It's superficial enough that I know it's more front than deep, middle, rear.
Okay.
But it feels deeper than the muscle itself.
Okay.
And it feels a little bit dull. It's not the kind of sharper pain that you get from a muscle strain.
Good. So these are all qualifiers that if you have pain, this is super cheesy, but a lot of times when I'm working with someone, especially remotely, one of the things that I try to work on with them is almost giving their pain like a personality. Again, as lame as that sounds, because you want to know, like, is this the kind of person that once they get pissed off, they stay pissed off? Or are they kind of more amenable to coming back, you know, meeting you halfway, having a conversation? Because when you start to identify how the pain works, it's going to tell you how much you can push your training and not set yourself back.
This pain is Greg. He's pretty mild mannered, but he's kind of a dick right now.
Okay, fair enough. But does that make sense? Where like if you're in pain, if you're like us, you're not going to just not train. It's a question of what can you do to still get a stimulus and not set yourself back. So first order of business again that I'm going to talk about with Dave is how bad is it? Feel through some of the severity and the kind of the temperament of the pain. And then one other thing that he mentioned is that it's on the front mostly, and especially with shoulder things. When you think about structurally, you want to know what the pain generator is and what you're affecting. So are you looking more at the joint? Are you looking at the labrum? Are you looking at bicep tendon? Are you looking at some sort of like ligamentous strain? Because there's a lot of stuff going on here with the collarbone and where it attaches to the shoulder blade too. So lots of different things that can be impacted by that. With the elbow, most often what I see is people talk about the itis. Do you feel like it was more on the outside or more on the front?
It's more on the
back,
more on the inner back. If you can't see, if my palm is turned up, it feels more towards the inner part.
You guys can't see it, but his actual supination range of motion is like this.
Yeah,
like he can't actually supinate his hand. So for someone who spends a lot of time in his desk, that makes a ton of sense because he's got a lot.
If he's going to be a waiter, he would be
in
a lot of trouble.
Yeah,
I'd be dropping trays.
That or you'd have to go straight like Egyptian style and serve this way.
Serve like this.
You really don't have mobility for either, if I'm being honest.
No, I think I'm going to have the runner serve the food, and I just go to the table.
You might just scare people off.
I'm not going to be a waiter in general.
Yeah. But so he's generally super pronated. He can't get into supination and has these coupled motions work together. It's also combined with rotation at the shoulder. So supination at the wrist, elbow, and then rotation of the shoulder. Historically, he's limited in internal rotation, which is going to change how the ball and socket moves at the joint. So a lot of times, basically TLDR for elbow pain, one of the first things I look at is shoulder rotation, because how this bone sits is going to determine how much torque is put here and at the interface of the hand and the weight. Because it's more than just a shoulder. Ultimately, your hand is what's connected to the weight, and your elbow is just kind of at the mercy of what's going on with those 2 points. So if you're dealing with elbow pain, you haven't had success, look at your shoulder mobility and look at your forearm mobility. More than just you have to treat the soft tissue. But if you want to improve the system, that's how I would go about doing it. Now, given that his pain was bad enough that he could not press, but he could get through the rest of his day, if I were working with him in person, I'd still say go train. Just do things that are going to limit your grip. And if you can, position your hand in a more of a neutral position. Did you do a lot of like neutral dumbbell pressing?
Well, dumbbell pressing was the thing that I always felt the best because you have that greater
degrees of freedom.
So I wasn't like full on palms facing.
Yeah.
But the way I dumbbell press in general is, I don't have my, I'll use my left side. I don't have my humerus all the way out at 90 degrees with my palm pronated. It's
what is your hand position?
It's more like this, like a 45-ish degree.
Okay. If you ever look at people, a lot of people have a preference in terms of like the degree of pronation and supination. You're going to see a difference in hands. Like I can't even get mine even. That's because I'm all kinds of jacked up right now. But a lot of times when I'm looking at elbow pain, people kind of forget that this is at the mercy of what's happening here. And we use our hands for so many things during the day. If you're working at your desk, especially, or like you're at a keyboard or a mouse, we're living in this position of left-right bias already. And so you're taking a biased system and asking it to not be biased under load. Not going to happen.
That freedom of motion thing too made me think that probably the reason why the prime equipment is fantastic. I love it in general, but one of the things that was bothering me about it is that it does lock you in a certain hand position. And their incline press in particular, if I could change one thing about it, it would be the grips. Because if you've ever used it, you're either in complete pronation or you're complete
high abduction.
Very high abduction. So most people, the optimal I shouldn't use that word. The best way to press is not with your arm all the way at a 90-degree angle to your torso. It's somewhat tucked. But it's really hard to do that when their grips either put you all the way out here, or they have one that's just completely neutral. They're 90 degrees to each other. So it'd be nice if there was something like right about here, but there isn't. So, and it's like I said, I went to the Smith press, and you might think, is that really any better? But it is, because it at least allows you a little bit of a chance to manipulate your palm around the straight bar, so you can still get your humerus a little bit more tucked.
And I think the range of motion on a Smith is so much more organic too. I think one of the hardest things about the Prime machines is that the range, I mean, there's a lot of manipulation that you can do, and you can really get set up great. But if you're training alone, it's really hard to get into a good position to where the bottom portion of the range isn't just
that's
janky.
Tough too. I always use some stoppers behind like they have the rubber stoppers, and then I put something else behind that, like you see a lot of people do, just so that the first rep out of the bottom isn't so deep. Yeah. Because if I didn't have that, I probably couldn't go anywhere near as heavy, just because it would be too much torque on the shoulder and pec at the very bottom too.
I guess I'm just thinking from the injury standpoint, one other thing that we should have looked at with you, I'm not going to say like posterior capsule mobility. Like if you go see a PT locally, a lot of times they're going to say, oh, your posterior capsule is tight. And it might be, but most of us have a tight posterior capsule. And those ligaments are really tight for a reason, especially if you move any appreciable amount of mass pressing, you need that stability. So what I see happen is they go and they get all kinds of stretched out, and then they don't have the stability they need, rather than just looking at the question of, well, why is it tight? And really often it's being able to actually find a posterior tilt of the scapula. So a lot of times just getting your rib cage in a better position is going to kind of glue scapula and rib cage together better. It's going to set the shoulder a little bit better. So that's also why I get
it. Yeah, it's good that you mentioned like scapular positioning mobility too, because one of the things that was helping me with the right side elbow pain was I did that right arm reach drill. Like lying on the ground. So
yeah, but we got to get you off of that.
Oh, okay. Well, then I won't use that. It's a bad example. Never mind. False positive.
No, what were you gonna say?
Oh, well, I mean, if you haven't done this drill, it's basically something where you lie on the ground in like a 90-90 position, and as you do the breathing, you kind of try to reach. I reach my right arm up in front of me, but the goal there isn't to just reach get your hand closer to the ceiling. It's to get your scapula to kind of move, like rotate across your.
And then on inhalation, the rib cage moves back.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can change the angle on that too, just to manipulate reach position, different fibers of serratus.
That's what she said.
Different fibers of serratus. Ooh, talk dirty. That's not awkward. But yeah, I think just coming back to the shoulder and elbow stuff, if you're dealing with elbow pain, you always want to make sure you're looking at the soft tissue, look at the pain generator, looking at the shoulder. It could be anything from bicep tendon, labrum, could be some sort of just capsular pain, could be rotator cuff, could be any myriad of things. None of those things are as big a deal as they sound, or as you've been probably led to believe growing up. But generally stabilizing the area is going to be a good place to start. Start looking at the shoulder blade itself. Do your core stuff, because that will pull the rib cage in better position. Elbows very often at the mercy of shoulder rotation, because as you go through different degrees of motion, just like the hip, the shoulder joint has to go through varying degrees of internal, external, and internal rotation. Like you go through this arc. So I think I just flip-flop those because my brain's anyway. If you don't have those ranges of motion, you're going to be biased, and then probably at the mercy of where your hand is in contact with the weight. So,
well, all right, guys. I think we're about an hour. So, thanks again, everybody, for joining us.
Real quick, if you guys are still listening, be sure you check out the new First Detachment nutrition website. It's been completely redone. There's some really cool new swag up. The supplements are awesome. They're the only ones that we'll use, not just because of Justin, but we generally don't. We're not big supplement people, but First Detachment's killed it. So go check it out. They just had a big Black Friday sale. They just dropped some new merch this Monday as well. And anything else?
Yeah.
Coming?
If you're in your off season, field rations, WTF for pre-workout,
Yes.
and then your suppressor for your GDA.
Oh, and
Yeah.
for women, the cramp away, not just for, I mean, like the adaptogen complex for stress management is awesome. It is so good for both men and women.
Yeah, I wish we could market that better because we've actually got really good feedback on the cramp.
I tell a lot of people to use it.
It's yeah. I mean, I don't have a lot of personal experience with menstrual cramps, so but I mean,
No, you live with how many women?
a lot of indirect experience, but no, it's really interesting because we get really good feedback on that. But
I mean, even like just for like stress management, water retention, things like that. I take it if I know I'm having like a super stressful week coming up. The ashwagandha is pretty powerful, and that's the case I'm 66, right?
yeah,
And I also have, God, I can't think of it right now, but it's all the products that I used to use. The Revive Calm, I've done Morphicalm, and then there was another.
Do you want to hit the rack?
No. There was another product. I basically took all the products I used over time and now have them in Cramp Away and Hit the Rack.
awesome. You know what's interesting is someone out there's got to be a big podcast. Someone has been talking about our PMCS series. We plowed through QRF, and we're doing it with suppressor.
Wow.
Yeah, we're sold out. With
No way.
Yeah, with like we have our trigger points for reordering. You know, it's like an eight week lead time to get the products manufactured. It's a big deal, and I don't know. I wish I could find out because it's hard. You can't track like someone on some big podcast mentioned it, but someone must have mentioned the QRF, Renal Reset, and suppressor because they just like, and especially QRF just exploded in the last 2 weeks, and we sold basically like 6 months of product in 2 weeks just on QRF.
Wow, that's
cool.
Yeah.
If it's very unlikely that whoever did it actually watches this podcast also, but if you do, DM me or something, let me know. We appreciate it.
Yeah, Dave just panicked because suppressor. He was like, I don't want it to be out of stock. We live off of suppressor. I take it daily just for A1C management too, and just got my labs done, and it's better than it's been. So
awesome. Yeah.
So
we're working on getting all of them reordered right now, which is a good problem to have. But yeah, they're flying off. Someone's mentioning it somewhere.
Yeah, and if you've got a prescription for your growth hormone, then your berberine.
Yes, yeah. Well, that's the kind of thing that's that's said but not said is our products are all produced with the enhanced bodybuilder in mind. I mean, they really are. Like our Go pills are designed to go with ephedrine. Obviously, suppressor is designed for if you're on GH and you're going to have growth hormone related insulin resistance. That's designed exactly to counter that. So, we are hardcore bodybuilders at our core, and so everything's kind of designed. I mean, it's not like it works regardless. The products are, but they're designed with that thought process in mind. Competitive athletes and bodybuilders.
Yeah. So if you got 1,000 carbs today, eat them.
Yeah.
Suppressor.
All right. Well, I think we're good. Thanks, guys, again. Remember to drop us comments. Anything you want us to touch on, let us know. We use a lot of your feedback. And remember, we can find more content at teamtroponin.com.
Thanks, guys.
For more content like this, visit www.teamtroponin.com.
This video is brought to you by First Detachment Nutrition, battle-tested nutrition, expert formulated supplements. Join the First Detachment revolution.